Hi, comic book fans, and welcome to another SuddenlyComics.com video. We have got a special edition today. I have got with me Kid Comics. Kid Comics has just started in the YouTube community, and he's got a great channel. He's put up some excellent YouTube videos. One of the things I like about them is he shows a lot of enthusiasm for comics, which I think is an important thing if you're going to be in comics. So I thought it'd be worth getting him on the channel, introduce him to you, and you can go and follow him as a result. So I'm going to call this guy Kid because he is a kid, and I think there's about 50 years difference between the two of us, or something
Yeah.
like that. But what we do share is a passion for comics. So there may be a generation gap of 50 years, but for somehow we both like comics. So I'm going to ask Kid to explain to me how he got into comics.
So pretty much how I first got into comic books was I was looking through my dad's old comic collection because it's been sitting there for years, even decades. And it's just been moving around because we've moved a ton of like different houses. And I finally decided to check it out. And the first book that really caught my attention was A Werewolf by Night number 32.
Okay.
And if you don't know, that's the first appearance of Moon Knight. And I really, really love that book because I really love the art inside. Just the cover was so cool. And it was interesting to see how Moon Knight used to be portrayed as like a comic book character. So pretty much, I just started looking more and more through my dad's comic collection, and I kept finding some really awesome books. So yeah, and then I eventually made the YouTube channel. So
Okay. So the characters in the comic books, did you know them from the movies and the TV before you knew them from the comic books?
yeah, So, I mean, characters like Moon Knight, I definitely watched the Moon Knight show before I actually got into like my dad's comic collection. So, I was pretty familiar with characters like Moon Knight, and there was also some Spider-Man books like Amazing Spider-Man 252. So, yeah, I was kind of familiarizing myself with some of these characters a little bit more.
Okay, and the comics we see behind you, are they your dad's, are they yours, or a mix?
So, they're pretty much a mix of mine and my dad's. We pretty much work together with the whole ASM thing because this entire wall, if you haven't noticed, is all Amazing Spider-Man books.
Yeah.
We work together on certain like runs, whether it be like the Venom run, where my dad in his collection, he had Amazing Spider-Man 298, 299, and 301, but I managed to snag a 300
Oh,
in a
wow.
pretty awesome comic store.
That's a good snag. Can we have a look at it?
Oh, yeah, sure. See if I can pull it out right now. So, I mean, this isn't as nice as your usual like Amazing Spider-Man copy compared to my other dads, but it's still really, really clean. The red really presents well, which is what I
Yeah,
was
that's
looking
good.
for. But, it's also a newsstand copy like my dad's other copies. I range it around like a 6.0, maybe like 5.5 because it's missing a few corners. But overall, the book presents pretty well, and it's got a pretty cool story inside.
And that's an expensive comic. So how do you fund your comic purchasing?
Well, that's an interesting one. Sometimes I'll have to like, get rid of some of my comics. I have my dad kind of help me like kind of sell my comics through like an eBay store or
Yeah.
something. But most of the time it's just like money from like like my birthdays or, like Christmas gifts. So, that mostly that just comes from like Christmas or like birthday money.
Okay, fair enough. And yeah, well, that's actually one of the ways, when I started collecting probably when I was about your age, maybe a bit younger. And what I used to do is I used to buy comics at a local market stall, uh, and I used to take them to comic shops and sell them for a bit more money.
Mm.
Basically the hobby then funded itself. And now at the other end of my life, I'm doing the same thing. So I fund my hobby through buying and selling some comics and then spending any profit that I make on buying a bigger comic.
Mhm.
So yeah.
How about you? How did you start comic book collecting?
So literally like that. So probably when I was about 13, 14, maybe 15, I used to live in a town in the north of England.
Mhm.
Um, and they had market store. They had a market stall there, and this guy sold secondhand comics. And I used to love them. I used to love reading them, and they were cheap. I'd used to get a bit of pocket money, and with my pocket money, I could buy four or five. They were they were beat up. They were not but I like reading them. And it wasn't easy, particularly easy at the time to get superhero comics in the UK. The Marvel stuff wasn't that widely distributed. To be able to get those, and then I got them, and then I used to have to go when I went to school. I used to go to a boarding school, a bit like Harry Potter's school, and we had houses and things. And I used to have to cross London. I used to have to get a train down to London and go across London. And when I did that, I found there was the first ever specialist comic shop in London. And I realized that the comics that I was buying for, a few pennies uh, in Yorkshire, I could sell for a few pounds in London.
Mhm.
So whenever I used to cross London going to school, I used to take a little stack of comics, and then sell them, and then I don't, and then I've generally just done that throughout my life. I've had gaps where I've sort of been out of comics, so um, generally children stop it. So
Yeah.
I had a gap of about 25 years between the birth of my children, where all the comics, just like your dad, they were up in the attic, uh, you know, from when I was collecting in my 20s and 30s. Um, and then when I got to my late 50s, actually during COVID, it was COVID, I sort of said, "Oh, I need to do something during COVID. I'm going to get all my comics out the attic, see what they're worth." And some of the comics I was, a bit stunned, when I put them up there, they were worth £5 and they're now worth 500, some of them, so
Mhm.
like Amazing Spider-Man 300.
Mhm.
I bought that new when it first came out. So I have it. I have the one that I bought for cover price.
Oh wow, that's cool.
I've not had it graded because I think it's it's not in the nines. I think it's probably a 7.5 and 8.0, something like that. I mean, it's pretty good, but it's got some dings on the corners.
Hmm.
So tell me about your YouTube channel. What are your plans? Are you going to be doing regular content?
Oh yeah, I'm pretty much just gonna be talking about like just mostly comic books, and I hope to in the future see a lot more like comic book collections that have been like untouched, so that way we can like find some really awesome books, and I can show all my viewers some really cool stuff. And I'm probably gonna start going to a lot more like antique shops now and flea markets because I know our outdoor flea market back in Rosemont is
Yeah.
closed now. So I'm gonna have to start going into indoor flea markets and such. So yeah, I mean, I'm pretty much just gonna try and figure out ways I can find more comics and show you guys some pretty cool comic book content.
But I saw one of your videos. You've got a pretty decent comic book store locally, haven't you? It looked really good.
Yeah, they're really awesome. Comic Buying Center. They have some really crazy books. I remember they used to have Amazing Fantasy 15 because pretty much they get all their books from just like random like old collections. They just buy pretty much any type of collection. And they have books now. They even bought like or they have a Action Comics 5 that they got from a collection, which is the first appearance of Jimmy Olsen. And even like or no, that's Action Comics 6. That they also have an Action Comics 5, but they just have a ton of awesome books, and it's really cool to see such like old and unique books that introduce such unique characters.
Yeah, well, that looked like a really good store, and I just imagine you'd spend a couple of hours in there rummaging through the boxes trying to find stuff. And how do they price them? Do they say, "Oh, everything in this box is $2 or $5"?
Yeah, they pretty much have like a ton of just long boxes, and they put like stickers saying how much like each book is, and they also have like price tags, like that $20 bin they have. They have some pretty cool books in there. They have like the first appearance of Shocker for only $20, but you know how it's like missing like half of the cover. But still they've got some really, really awesome deals there that I've managed to find. And they also have their eBay store, which I've also bought a few books from on auction there.
Yeah, but you're right. It's yard sales and thrift stores and antique markets are a good place for finding some bargains because quite often, somebody will collect a few comics and then they pass away, and the people who find them don't want them. Their relatives, they just sort of go, I'll give these to the local charity shop, or I'll give them to, and sometimes there are some really good comics in those, and you can pick them up. If you're
Mhm.
lucky, you can pick them up cheap.
Yeah. Going back to what you were like talking about, how you used to collect comic books when you were a kid back in England.
Yeah.
What was like your most like memorable comic book that like you really love to this day that you managed to get off the newsstand?
Okay. So, well, so I very rarely bought off the newsstand because they were too, if I bought off the newsstand, that would be all my pocket money gone for the week. Whereas if I bought them off the market stall, I could get five or six. Um, so I still have one of the comics that I bought off that market stall
Mhm.
um, 50 odd years ago. And do you know the Spider-Man cover with Medusa with her hair, where
Oh
she,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. So that was I've got a really beat up copy of that, which I got off the market stand 50 odd years ago, and I'll never sell that because it's just it's memory. It's not worth very much because it's in a very poor condition. But that's probably the one I've got that got this eldest. One of my big regrets is I picked up an Amazing Spider-Man 1 off this market stall.
Wow.
Um, and I paid the equivalent of five old English pennies or 5 cents for it. Okay. I mean,
Wow.
it was probably a low mid grade. It was pretty decent. I think it was about a 4.0, something like that. I mean, it didn't have the grading system around then.
Hmm.
But I did realize it was worth a lot more than I'd paid for it, and I took it into the shop in London, and they paid me £5 for it, which, like at the time, was that was like a year's pocket money type of thing. So, but now I wish I'd kept it, of course. Um, so yeah, that's the one I remember buying and selling and wish I'd kept it. But I sort of got 100 times my money back um, at the time. So
Yeah. Um, Honestly, my dad, when he was at his comic book shop, they had some really, really cool books there. Obviously, he couldn't afford it back then, but they had books on like display, like an Amazing Fantasy 15 and Journey to Mystery 83. And he
yeah.
was a really, really big Thor fan. So he really, really wanted a Journey into Mystery 83. And now with all these books, I think he honestly could get a Journey into Mystery 83, even though if it's like in like a point 0.5 to 1.0 range. But yeah, he ended up selling some books there for a little bit of gas money. He kind of recalls maybe was it like an X-Men 94, but he doesn't remember those books too much. But overall, it was pretty interesting to hear some tales from his comic book shop.
So
Also,
it
I do
sounds
have oh
yeah.
sorry.
Oh yeah, yeah. It sounds like you set Dad off again, and he's also back to collecting.
Hmm.
Okay, so the other thing I'd say is, if you want to grow your channel, a really good idea is to do a regular spot, and produce content on a regular basis. Once a week's fine, but it's really useful if you do say, right, I'm going to do it once a week, and I'm going to do it on a whatever it is, Saturday at 7 o'clock or Tuesday at 8 o'clock, because then people get used to watching at that particular time, and you'll get a repeat viewers. That would be the other thing I'd say. So if you can do it once a week, I know it's not always easy, because I guess you've got 101 other things going on. Um, but that would be my other advice, to try and get a few viewers, um, and really just the enthusiasm about comics will keep you getting people in,
Hmm.
because there are not, most of the people with YouTube channels are like me, they've got grey hair, and that all my viewers are about 40 years older. But there's a whole load of younger comic collectors out there because I see them at the comic conventions and comic marts, and you're much more likely to be able to get them on your, as viewers than I ever would. You know, it's just the way it is. Um, so yeah, so that's the audience you should really be trying to capture.
Hmm.
And what
Yeah.
do your friends, are any of your friends into comics, or do they all think you're a bit weird?
Yeah, it's kind of a mix again. I have one friend. He's just as interested in comics as I am, but he doesn't really have some of these older books. He's a lot more into like the modern stuff,
Yeah.
and he reads a lot more of the modern books. I don't know like too much about all the stuff he reads, but we do talk about like comic books like every so often. So yeah, at least I have one person to talk
Well,
about
that's
comics.
good. Yeah, that's good. Yeah. And what about your teachers? Do they know you collect comics?
No, none of them really do. Um, I just don't know if they're actually like interested in any of that stuff, so I don't really bother like questioning them.
No.
Uh, but yeah,
Yeah, I bet you amongst your teachers there'll be at least one comic collector,
yeah.
especially in the States, because uh, it's more common in the States than it is in the UK. Um, Mind you, there's a fair number, it's quite surprising the number of people you talk to and you say, well, I collect comics, and they go, oh, I've got a load of comics,
Yeah.
from when I was
What's
a
like
kid.
what's like the oldest like comic that you collected back then? Like one of the
Oh, right. Well,
oldest
that's a
ones.
really good question. I do. One of the things I do like about comics is they tell you there's quite a lot of history behind them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I quite like comics with some history behind them. So, for instance, there's some history behind some of the comics that you've got up there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I actually did a bit of work trying to find out what was the earliest comic. Okay. And you'll be surprised to know you get back to about 1864. So, first of all, you end up having a discussion about what is a comic. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I define a comic as a series of drawings that tell a story, usually with word bubbles. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So if you use that definition, then there was a magazine in the UK called Punch Magazine, which started in about 1860, and it was like a sort of satire, political satire magazine, and it ran for a long time. It ran for about 100 years, and it used to have picture stories with a story, and they used to get a bubble in them. So that was one of the earliest, around 1864. And I have actually got a copy of the issue that is the first comic, theoretically the first comic. So, but there's a lot of argument about what is the first comic. The Americans and the British can't agree because the Americans will claim it's,
Mm-hmm.
um, something back. But it's certainly a lot earlier than the first Superman, um, and the first Batman. My earliest, my earliest sort of Marvel DC sort of superhero comic is, it's a Batman. Uh, it's a Batman 13, I think, which is quite early. Yeah. So,
Is the Batman 13 the one where they're like Batman and Robin are like swinging in with parachutes and it's like a
no,
giant.
it's not. Unfortunately, it's not.
Oh, okay, because my dad, he when he was older in high school, he got like a Batman 13, I think, or I think it was like a Batman 12 or 13, but it was like the cover where it was like Batman and Robin, they were swinging in with parachutes, and it was really old. It was missing like two or three-ish wraps, and like a half page was just cut out. And it was really, really rough. And my dad ended up getting rid of it and replacing it for his New Mutants 98.
Okay.
So
Yeah, I'll put a picture up of the when I do the edit. I'll put a picture up of the one I've got. I can't remember what it is, and it's really beat up. I have to keep it. I have to keep it in its bag. Otherwise, you only have to look at it and it starts disintegrating. Yeah.
I know some of like the oldest comics my dad had. I remember the first one that I saw was an X-Men 14, which was the first appearance of the Sentinels.
Yep.
Um I don't have it on me right now, but it's really really rough. Like I like tried taking it out and it just like started falling apart.
No,
I
that's
mean,
right.
yeah, I mean it's really old X-Men book, so I mean it was understandable. But most of my dad's comics are actually really nice condition. Like it really depends like whether he bought it like already like used or like read. Like his World Finite 32, I doubt he did that much like, like damage to the book because it's like around like a mid-grade. But like the books that he has like actually like bought off of like the comic shop like when they released, they're
Yeah.
like in really really like nice condition, like maybe in like the nines.
Oh,
So,
right. So he looked after them quite well then if he bought them when he bought them.
mhm.
Yeah, that's always good. I mean, I think the I'd start on with another key question for you. Do you prefer your comics raw or in a slab?
Oh, that's a difficult one. I really prefer them honestly just raw because then you actually get to like read the book and you get to see like the interior art like my Amazing Spider-Man 300. But honestly, there's a lot of like other books that I've just been able to see like the story and I've been able to read them and you know what I mean? It's just like about enjoying them like raw. Although my dad disagrees, he rather thinks like comic books are purely investment purposes. So if you're gonna buy like a really key comic book, whether it be like a Tales of Suspense 39 or even something like an Action Comics #1, you best get it graded because you know what I mean? It's just comic book history and comic books aren't what they used to be anymore. So,
Well, I think you're interesting because the fact that you read comics is great, and I would tend to agree with you. I've got a lot of comics. I'd probably between 100 and 200,000 comics, and 98% of them are raw. Um, I do slab for I do slab occasionally. I put it in a slab. If it's falling apart, I think putting it in a slab is a good idea because it
yeah.
keeps it keeps it together. I put it in a slab if it's a particularly valuable comic, because it's worth more. It's worth more once it's graded. And also, at some stage, these comics are going to go to my kids, and they may want to sell them, and they'll find it a lot easier to sell them if they're graded. So yeah, I do have some graded comics. Also, if they've been signed, I tend to get them graded if there's a sort of major signature on it, because otherwise, who I could have signed it. Whereas if you get it authenticated, that's worth doing. But otherwise, I'm with you. The other thing I quite like about old comics is the smell, and
Hmm.
you can't
Yeah.
get that if it's in a slab.
Yeah. It sometimes it's like it's really, really bad. Me and my dad used to just joke about it and laugh about it all the time. Cause like especially with like those old golden age books, we'd smell that and it's just like sometimes it'd just be like absolutely like putrid. So it's just like not something you get usually.
Yeah, what's happening there is the old paper. It was
Mhm.
quite cheap paper they used for the comics. It got a lot of acid in it. And gradually over a period of time, the acid, so paper's made out of wood, which is cellulose fiber, and the acid begins to degrade the cellulose and make it weak. So the smell you get, that sort of musty old book smell, is actually decaying cellulose.
Yeah. I didn't know that, but that's pretty interesting.
Yeah, so that's what's happening there. So what is your do you have a sort of a comic that you're targeting next? Do you sort of have a list and think what I'd really like next is this?
Oh, that's an interesting one. What I really want next is usually just ASM books right now because I'm trying to finish my Amazing Spider-Man 1 through 100 run, especially with that mail call, the CGC mail call I did. I got some really early Spider-Man books graded. And the next book I'm trying to get is an Amazing Spider-Man 20, which is the first appearance of Scorpion. But if I can't get that, I'd settle with like an Amazing Spider-Man 40 because I have 38, 39 and then 41, which 41 is the first Rhino. So I'm missing 40, which is kind of like the that Green Goblin sort of like story where it's like I guess not the death of him, but like you know what I mean? It's just like a different sort of like Green Goblin story. So
Yeah, yeah, and I think you're doing the right thing as well. You're buying. You're not necessarily having to buy a 9.8 all the time. You're buying the copy that's available and you can afford. And that's exactly the right thing to do. Uh, Better a low grade than a no grade. And as you go through, I've done this a load of times. As you go through life you just come across, you get another copy and it's better than that copy, and you just upgrade. Um, so gradually over a period of time, your grade of the comics gets better. But I'd rather have, you're going for a run of one of the most expensive run of comics in the world.
mhm.
Amazing Spider-Man. You didn't start small, did you?
Mm.
Um, Amazing Spider-Man's. Have you got any of the 1 to 10?
No, I
No.
haven't gotten any of those yet. Um, I'm trying definitely, but that's gonna be a while before I get any of those. I
Yeah.
think honestly, an extremely like underrated comic book cover in the Amazing Spider-Man 1 through 100 run is definitely Amazing Spider-Man 8. You know, the first appearance of Living Brain where like Spider-Man's out in like
Oh
the
yes.
yellow
Yeah.
issue.
Yeah.
That one's like my favorite. I really love that one. It's a very like underrated one. No
Yeah. And
people
that's a
don't
lot
really talk
cheaper
about that
than
one.
a lot cheaper than the other ones.
Hmm.
Yeah.
It's a really interesting one, but the cover on that's really, really cool.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Well, it's been good to talk to you. And keep up the enthusiasm for comics. I will be checking in to make
Mhm.
sure that you're still doing comics. You will
Yeah,
get distracted by women at some stage.
yeah,
I'm sure you got a couple of older brothers. How much older
yeah.
are they?
They're all the way out in like college right now, so
Oh, okay. All right. So they've already been distracted by women. That's probably why
yeah,
they're not interested in the comics. Right. Okay. Good to talk to you.
yeah.
And good luck with the channel. I'm going to
All
put a
right,
link. I'm going to put a link below to Kid Comics channel. So please click on that and go and look at some of his videos because they're really, really high quality. Um, and it's good to see somebody younger than about 40 doing comics videos.
all right. Well,
Cheers.
that's cool
Bye.
talking to you.